Chapter 5, Part 4 of Explorers and Travelers by Adolphus W. Greely. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by William Tomko. Chapter 5, Captain Meriwether Lewis and Lieutenant William Clark, Part 4. They were now in Lewis River, a broad greenish-blue stream filled with islands and dangerous rapids, which were passed in canoes, except one near the mouth, where a land portage of a mile was necessary. This brought them to the junction of the Lewis and Columbia rivers on October 17th, where they parted from the Nez Perces. These Indians lead a painful, laborious life, brightened by but few amusements, are healthy, comely, and generally well dressed, given to ornaments of beads, sea-shells, feathers, and paints. In winter they collect roots and hunt the deer on snowshoes. Toward spring cross the mountains to buy buffalo robes, and in summer and autumn catch salmon, usually by weirs at the rapids, in the following manner. About the center of each was placed a basket formed of willows, 18 or 20 feet in length, of a cylindrical form, and terminating in a conic shape at its lower extremity. This was situated with its mouth upward opposite to an aperture in the weir. The main channel of the water was conducted to this weir, and as the fish entered it, they were so entangled with each other that they could not move, and were taken out by untying the small end of the willow basket. Here Lewis began to lay in stores, and, fish being out of season, purchased 40 dogs, which for weeks had proved to be the best food available. On October 20th they again launched their canoes in the Columbia, and pushed on through the frequent rapids, looking forward with interest not unmixed with anxiety to the great falls of which the Indians told them. Arrived at the head of the rapids, they made a portage of nearly a mile, availing themselves of the assistance and guidance of the Indians. Owing to the great labor of portages, they kept to the river when possible, and reached a pitch of the river, which, being divided by two large rocks, descended with great rapidity down a fall 8 feet in height. As the boats could not be navigated down this steep descent, we were obliged to land and let them down as slowly as possible by strong ropes of elk skin. They all passed in safety except one, which, being loosed by the breaking of the rope, was driven down, but was recovered by the Indians below. Finally they came to an extremely dangerous place, where a tremendous rock projected into the river, leaving a channel of only 45 yards, through which the Columbia passed, its waters thrown into whirlpools and great waves of the wildest and most dangerous character. As the portage of boats over this high rock was impossible in their situation, Lewis resolved on a passage in boats, relying on dexterous steering, which carried them through safely, much to the astonishment of the Indians gathered to watch them. Another rapid was so bad that all papers, guns, ammunition, and such men as could not swim made a land portage, while Lewis and Clark took the canoes through safely, 2 at a time. The 25th brought them to the most dangerous part of the Narrows, which they concluded to hazard by canoe after using precautions as to valuable articles and men. The first 3 canoes escaped very well, the 4th nearly filled, the 5th passed through with only a small quantity of water. On the 28th Lewis was very much gratified by seeing an Indian with a round hat and sailor's jacket, which had come up the river by traffic, and as he went on similar articles became common. They passed a number of different tribes who behaved in a friendly manner, and among others the Inishoore at the Great Falls interested them by their cooking utensils, which were baskets so skillfully made of bark and grass as to serve as vessels for boiling their provisions. Some of the party were horrified, however, by the chief, who directed his wife to hand him his medicine bag, from which he brought out 14 forefingers, which he told us had once belonged to the same number of his enemies whom he had killed in fighting. On the 31st they came to the lower falls, where the river narrowed to 150 yards and fell 20 feet in a distance of 400 yards, while below was another exceedingly bad rapid. The upper rapid was so filled with rocks that Crusat, the principal waterman, thought it impracticable, so a portage of 4 miles was made over the route followed by the Indians. After their example, we carried our small canoe and all the baggage across the slippery rocks to the foot of the chute. The 4 large canoes were then brought down by slipping them along poles placed from one rock to another, and in some places by using partially streams which escaped alongside of the river. We were not, however, able to bring them across without 3 of them receiving injuries, which obliged us to stop at the end of the chute to repair them. On November 2nd, Lewis was intensely gratified by the first appearance of tide water, then pushed on with the greatest eagerness until he reached Diamond Island, where we met 15 Indians ascending the river in 2 canoes, but the only information we could procure from them was that they had seen 3 vessels, which we presumed to be European, at the mouth of the Columbia. As he went on, small parties of Indians in canoes were seen, and many small villages, principally of the Skilloots, who were friendly, well disposed, desirous of traffic, and visited so frequently as to be troublesome. One Indian, speaking a little English, said that he traded with a Mr. Haley. The weather had become foggy and rainy, but on November 7, 1805, while pushing down the river below a village of the Wahkiacums, the fog cleared off and we enjoyed the delightful prospect of the ocean. That ocean, the object of all our labors, the reward of all our anxieties. This cheering view exhilarated the spirits of all the party, who were still more delighted on hearing the distant roar of the breakers, and went on with great cheerfulness. Lewis, not content with a sight of the ocean, went on, determined to winter on the coast. A severe storm forced him to land under a high rocky cliff, where the party had scarcely room to lie level or secure their baggage. It blew almost a gale directly from the sea. The immense waves now broke over the place where we were encamped, and the large trees, some of them 5 or 6 feet thick, which had lodged at the point, were drifted over our camp, and the utmost vigilance of every man could scarcely save our canoes from being crushed to pieces. We remained in the water and drenched with rain during the rest of the day, our only food being some dried fish and some rain water which we caught. Yet, though wet and cold, and some of them sick from using salt water, the men are cheerful and full of anxiety to see more of the ocean. Here they were confined 6 days, and the rain had lasted 10 days, wetting their merchandise through, spoiling their store of dried fish, destroying and rotting their robes and leather dresses. A series of gales and long continued rain did not prevent Lewis and Clark from exploring the country for a suitable place for winter quarters. Lewis finally discovered a point of high land on the river Neutel, where a permanent encampment was established, which was called Fort Clatsop. It was situated in a thick grove of lofty pines, several miles from the sea and well above the highest tide. The fort consisted of 7 wooden huts, which were covered in by the 20th of November and later picketed so as to afford ample security. The party subsisted principally on elk, of which they killed 131. Fish and berries were much used in the early spring. Salt was made in considerable quantities on the seashore, and some blubber was secured from a stranded whale, 105 feet in length. In general, the winter passed without serious results, except that the health of some of the men was impaired by the almost constant rains, there being but 4 days without rain in the first 2 months. The conduct of the many Indian tribes with whom they had communication was almost always friendly, and in only 1 or 2 cases did even strange Indians from a distance show signs of hostility. The northwest coast had been visited so often that little could be added to the knowledge of their customs and mode of life. One comment of Lewis is, however, worthy of reproduction. We have not observed any liquor of any intoxicating quality used among these or any Indians west of the Rocky Mountains, the universal beverage being pure water. They sometimes almost intoxicate themselves by smoking tobacco, of which they are excessively fond, and the pleasure of which they prolong as much as possible by retaining vast quantities at a time, till after circulating through the lungs and stomach, it issues in volumes from the mouth and nostrils. It appears surprising that Lewis was ignorant of the discovery of the Columbia River by Captain Robert Gray, for he says that the name Point Adams was given by Vancouver. Further, he was ignorant of the fact that the trade at the mouth of the Columbia was conducted almost entirely by vessels from New England. From the English phrases of the Indian he knew that the traders must be either English or American, and presumed that they do not belong at any establishment at Nootka Sound. The original plan contemplated remaining at Fort Clatsop until April, when Lewis expected to renew his stock of merchandise from the traders who yearly visited the Columbia by ship. Constant rains, however, increased sickness among his men, while game failed to such an extent that they only lived from hand to mouth, and as merchandise lacked wherewith to buy food from the Indians, it became necessary to return. On departing, he left among the Indians a number of notices setting forth briefly the results of his expedition. One of these, through an American trader, reached Boston via China in February, 1807, about 6 months after Lewis's own return. On March 24, 1806, the party commenced to retrace their long and dangerous route of 4,144 miles to St. Louis. Their guns were in good order and the stock of ammunition plentiful, but their entire stock of trading goods could be tied up in a single blanket. Detained by scarcity of fish, they discovered the Multona (Willamette) River, which, hidden by an island, was not seen on their downward voyage. Lieutenant Clark went up the valley some distance to Nechecole village, where he saw an Indian house, all under one roof, 226 feet long. Of the valley of the Willamette, Lewis remarks that it was the only desirable place of settlement west of the Rocky Mountains, and it was sufficiently fertile to support 50,000 souls. He mentions its rich prairies, its fish, fowl, and game, its useful plants and shrubs, its abundant and valuable timber. The conditions of the rapids below the Dalles was such that one boat, fortunately empty, was lost, and the upper rapids being impracticable, they broke up or traded all their boats and canoes but two, which were carried to the upper river. They proceeded with the horses that had been purchased with the greatest difficulty. Bratton, too ill to walk, being on horseback, and on April 27th reached the village of the Walla Wallas near the mouth of Snake or Lewis River. Here they were so well received that Lewis says, "Of all the Indians whom we have met since leaving the United States, the Walla Wallas were the most hospitable, honest, and sincere." Their horses recruited to 23 head, cheered by information of a new route which would save 80 miles, and with Walla Walla guides, they moved in early May up the valley of Snake or Lewis River, and finding it too early to cross the mountains, encamped in the forks of the Kooskooskee, having meanwhile received back from their savage friend, Twisted Hair, their 38 horses entrusted to his care the previous year. Their journey by land was marked by great scarcity of food, which was roots or dog, except when the officers, practicing medicine for sick Indians, obtained horses for food. The use of dog, which was now very palatable, caused derision among the Indians. On one occasion, an Indian threw a half-starved puppy into Lewis's plate with laughter, which turned to chagrin when Lewis flung the animal with great force into the savage's face and threatened to brain him with a tomahawk. The Indians lived almost entirely on fish during the salmon season, and on roots the rest of the year. Their houses were collected under one roof, with many apartments, and two were seen each about 150 feet long. The difficulties of communicating with the Choponish were very great, and if errors occurred it was not astonishing. Lewis spoke in English, which was translated by one of the men in French to Chaboneau, who repeated it in Manitari to his wife. She put it into Shoshone to a prisoner, who translated it into Chopunish dialect. An attempt in early June to cross the mountains failed, the snow being 10 feet deep on a level. On June 24th they started again, and with great privations succeeded in following their trail of the previous September across the Bitterroot Mountains to Travelers' Rest Creek on Clark Fork, which was reached June 30th. Here the party divided in order to thoroughly explore different portions of the country. Lewis took the most direct route to the Great Falls of the Missouri, whence he was to explore Maria's River to 50° north latitude. Clark proceeded to the head of Jefferson River, down which Sergeant Ordway was to go in the canoes cached there. Clark himself was to cross by the shortest route to the Yellowstone, and, building canoes, descend to its mouth and rejoin the main party at that point. Lewis went into the Marias River country, but was unable to proceed far through lack of game. He there fell in with a band of Minnetarees, who attempted to steal his arms and horses, which resulted in a skirmish wherein 2 Indians were killed, the only deaths by violence during the expedition. Then, turning to the mouth of the Marias River, they were rejoined by Ordway's party, and on August 7th reached the mouth of the Yellowstone, where a note from Clark informed them of his safe arrival and camping place a few miles below. Clark had explored portions of the valleys of the Jefferson, Gallatin, and Madison, and had prescience of the wonders of the Yellowstone in a boiling hot spring discovered at the head of Wisdom River. His journey to Clark's Fork of the Yellowstone was made with comfort and safety, but there an accident to one of his men obliged him to make canoes, during which delay the Indians stole 24 of his horses. As Lewis descended the Missouri he saw that the tide of travel and adventure was already following in his track, and 2 daring Illinoisans, Dixon and Hancock, were at the mouth of the Yellowstone on a hunting trip. Rapidly descending the river the 23rd of September saw the party safe at St. Louis, the initial point of their great and eventful expedition. The great continental journey to and fro, from ocean to ocean, across barren deserts, through dangerous waterways, over snow-clad mountains, among savage and unknown tribes, had been accomplished with a success unparalleled in the world of modern adventure and exploration. This expedition was fraught with successful results second to none other ever undertaken in the United States. The extent, fertility, and possibilities of the great trans-Mississippi were made known, the possibility of crossing the American continent was demonstrated, the location of the great rivers and of the Rocky Mountains determined, the general good will of the interior Indians proved, and the practicability of trade and intercourse established. Furthermore, conjoined with the discovery of the Columbia by Gray, it laid the foundations of a claim which, confirmed by settlement and acknowledged by Great Britain, gave the United States its first foothold on the Pacific coast, and ultimately secured to the American nation not only the magnificent states of Oregon and Washington, but also the golden vales and mountains of California. Well might Jefferson declare that never did a similar event, their successful return, excite more joy through the United States. The humblest of its citizens had taken a lively interest in the issue of this journey. Clark was an able and faithful assistant to the unfortunate Lewis, who did not live to write the full story of the expedition. It seems, however, that the disposition in some quarters to regard Clark as the man to whom the success of the expedition was in greater part due finds no justification in a careful perusal of the narratives. So great a work was enough glory for the 2 men, the commander and the assistant. Clark's future career must be considered somewhat of a disappointment. During his absence he was promoted to be a first lieutenant of artillery, and on his return was nominated by Jefferson to be lieutenant colonel of the 2nd Infantry. But the Senate, by a vote of 20 to 9, declined to confirm him, and he resigned his commission as lieutenant February 27, 1807. Later he was an Indian agent and a brigadier general of the militia for the territory of Upper Louisiana, with station at St. Louis. In 1812 he declined an appointment as brigadier general and the opportunity of having Hull's command, a declination which was an injury to his country if he had the military ability attributed to him. Madison appointed him governor of the territory of Missouri, which office he filled from 1813 to the admission of Missouri as a state in 1821. Contrary to his wishes, he was nominated for the first governor, but failed of election. Monroe, in May, 1822, appointed him superintendent of Indian affairs, with station at St. Louis, which office he filled until his death, September 1, 1838. Captain Lewis did not live to long enjoy the honors that he had so bravely won. He reached Washington the middle of February, 1807, when Congress, which was in session, made to both leaders and men the donation of lands which they had been encouraged to expect as some reward for their toil and danger. But the President considered the discoveries of sufficient importance to present them to Congress, and a special message, on February 19, 1806, and in appreciation of Captain Lewis's valuable services, immediately appointed him to be governor of Louisiana, which office Lewis accepted, resigning for that purpose from the army on March 4, 1807. Of the civil services of Governor Lewis, Jefferson says: "He found the territory distracted by feuds and contentions among the officers, and the people divided into factions. He used every endeavor to conciliate and harmonize. The even handed justice he administered to all soon established a respect for his person and authority." While on the way to Washington in September, 1809, Governor Lewis, in a fit of derangement, killed himself, thus, to quote again from Jefferson, "depriving his country of one of her most valued citizens, who endeared himself to his countrymen by his sufferings and successes, in endeavoring to extend for them the bounds of science, and to present to their knowledge that vast and fertile country, which their sons are destined to fill with arts, with science, with freedom and happiness. Surely posterity will declare that Meriwether Lewis lived not in vain." End of Chapter 5, Part 4. Recording by William Tomko.